Hey, we are so excited to have Perrin DesPortes, co-founder and partner of Polaris Healthcare, with us today. Perrin is one of our partners here at Dentist Advisors. Perrin, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Spencer, and great to be with the audience. I'm looking forward to our discussion today for sure.
Yeah, as we start our discussion, we love talking to Perrin about what Polaris specializes in, and as some of the key topics that Perrin will touch on and that I will ask questions, especially from uh, um, a financial advisor's perspective, um, and really all dentists is it really rings a bell when Perrin says there will come a time in every practice where you will likely want to consider selling your practice, or you have to exit eventually. So you're either selling it. Some of you are considering buying. Some with Perrin, we talk about growing from one practice to two practice. Does it make sense to go to three practices? Do you make more money when you get to your third and fourth practice, or is the potential there to for that to be a bad decision? And sometimes it's fun to hear Perrin talk someone out of making such a big decision like that for the better. And so we want to introduce the model that Perrin and Polaris provides, and why we see Perrin and his business as such a valuable partner to dentist advisors. So
Yeah, likewise, Spencer. I mean, I think y'all are a unique breed in the space and the philosophies and the way you do what you do and how you work with your clients. And we, to a degree, are as well. I mean, Polaris is part consulting company, part sell-side advisor, and we work exclusively with group dental practices. And, I think your points are good in that while we focus all of our work in the group practice space, it doesn't mean that we believe that this is the journey for everybody. And I think that's born out of, seeing people who've made fundamental mistakes, maybe sometimes being in a little bit of a hurry, and trying to, for lack of a better term, keep up with the Joneses. Well, just because everybody else is building a group practice doesn't mean you should do it too. And I think the how hard can it be thought process behind people who may be successful in their current practice and mid-career, if you're bored where you are, that's not a good point to be taking on additional debt and leverage and a lot of stress and making financially oriented decisions without all the facts. So we see that go bad very often, and we can talk about some of that today as well too. So I think there's a good fit between our two companies, is my point.
yeah, it's so true, Perrin. When it's the questions come up with the advisors frequently about when do I start talking about all of these big questions about adding a practice or buying another practice or exiting. And so we're inviting Perrin to pull up a deck of information and share from experience and in his profession on how we can utilize Perrin and his services.
Yeah, happy to do that. Let me know when this thing kind of pops up on your screen so we know that it's live. You getting the
Yep.
full visual there?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So this is we do at Polaris. I get the, I guess, good fortune of being able to share a lot of content, a lot of education. Some of it's from the stage at different conferences, like where I am this weekend in Orlando, and some is off of webinars or Facebook Live type captive settings like this. And we're a very I'd like to think that we're a very educationally driven type of a company. We have a great degree of subject matter expertise, but it's kind of in a narrow scope, And I think one of the things that people like about us is that whether it's our podcast or some of the presentation material or any of the way we share our information, we try to this stuff isn't easy, but we try to break it down into digestible chunks that make it a little bit more palatable for somebody who's going through the journey. And this handful of slides I'll share with you is taken from a presentation that I've given numerous times before. It's about an hour in length. I cut a bunch out of it. So we're going to talk about not 4 primary challenges of building a group practice, but maybe the 2 that we see people get wrong most often, or 2 of the more consequential decisions that somebody's going to be faced with if they choose to go down this path. So I'll breeze through this. My name is Perrin DesPortes, like Spencer said. I'm one of the co-founders of Polaris. I'm not going to bore you with that. Polaris is a part consulting, part sell-side advisory firm that focuses exclusively with group dental practices. We do a little bit outside of dentistry, but I'd say 90% of our world is all around dentistry and group dental practices. So the context of some of what I'm going to share is to hopefully give your audience and those viewing a little bit of context around should you or should you not build a group practice. Like I say, the world of private equity and their interest and then valuation multiples and all of that kind of stuff at the top end of the food chain, your Heartland Dentals, your Aspen Dentals, all these enterprise level businesses that are professionally managed and private equity backed are one part of the spectrum. And then you have your traditional ADA single dentist in a solo location at the other end of the spectrum. And then you have in the middle these entrepreneurs who happen to be dentists who want to build a multi-location group. That could be 3 or 4 locations. It could be 30 to 40 locations, and is this the right path for each one of them individually? And what do you need to know if you're going to do it? And I think in today's world, I'll maybe cut to the chase at the end and spoil the ending for everybody. But if my recommendation, generally speaking, is if you're 4 or 5 years from retirement and you've got a successful practice and you've worked with dentist advisors to have a diversified portfolio and some degree of confidence around retirement and financial security and everything, I don't know that it's worth it for you to take on a lot of debt, a lot of chaos in your life, and a lot of stress to go more than one location if your current location is performing really, really well. On the other hand, if you work with dentist advisors and you're mid-career, whatever that means, you got 10 to 15 to 20 years to go, and your core business is performing really well and generating nice cash flows for you and your family, I think it's prudent to think about the lifespan of your successful practice in terms of the next 10 to 20 years ahead of you. Are there going to be changes in the workforce? Are there going to be changes in the dynamics around patient relationships, payer mix, competitive pressures with competitors, enterprise level DSOs maybe entering your neighborhood? Are there things that you don't control that might adversely impact the stream of cash that you forecast for the next 10 to 20 years? And if you do have that long to go, then maybe simply building a group practice that's a handful of locations, nothing gargantuan or extravagant, but maybe 3 or 4 over the next 10 years is a prudent course, because you're building a business that's not uniquely dependent upon your clinical skill set. And so, as counterintuitive as it may sound, sometimes building a group practice as more of a defensive strategy is a cornerstone of building a successful business, not building a multi-location group out of pure ego and ringing a cash register at the end. So just a couple of things to think about maybe. And every business, whether it's a financial advisory firm or a consulting firm or a healthcare services business, goes through some level of ebbs and flows, whether it's revenue growth or locations or profitability and income. But we all, as entrepreneurs, see some level of increase, and then it starts to kind of flatten out. And then we're left with a choice. What do we want to do? Do we continue to kind of tread water and hope we can sustain the business? Maybe does the business start to take a downturn? Not ideal. Or do we want to force through what's known as an inflection point and get the graph to turn back up in terms of an increasing trajectory? And how many times might we want to do that? So this is a graph that represents maybe the transition from a successful solo practice through the first inflection point to a reasonable multi-location group. Like I said, call it 3 or 4 locations. And then if the business starts to plateau at 3 or 4 locations, do you really want to go all in and build a 10 to 20 to 30 location type of a group through the next inflection point? So this is something we experience individually through our careers, educational or otherwise, and certainly through the businesses that we help drive and create. I think for you and the way y'all approach your client base, you're always thinking 5 to 10 to 20 years out. And that perspective is really healthy for your clients. And it's why I think there's a lot of congruence between our philosophies and the way y'all approach those relationships. We try not to make decisions for today. We always try to make decisions through some type of decision tree analysis about where the person, the prospective client wants to end up in the next 3 to 5 years. And I tell people, I'm 53, and when I entered the workforce, it was still kind of the IBM generation, like you had one career for 40 years, you retired with a gold watch, you wore a blue suit and a white shirt and a red tie the whole time, and that was it, right? Well, that ain't the case anymore. And I think the way the world changes, the way technology influences it, the way we're all kind of pushed and pulled in different direction, is really prudent to really think 3 to 5 years at a time, because that's not a lot of time, but a lot can happen in that time. And always connecting your personal expectations and your degree of success personally with what you want professionally, because the two, in our world at least, yours, mine, and the clients we all work with, the personal and the professional are inseparable. So you have to have a lot of congruence. Anybody who says, hey, I want to build a multi-location group, I want to add 10 locations in the next 5 years, and I want to spend more time with my family while I'm doing it, I'm like, all right, that ain't going to happen, right? That's completely irreconcilable and to a degree not possible. So like I say, consider your timeline. Consider if you're close to retirement or confident that you can sustain the business, or if you've got longer to go and there may be competitive pressures beyond your control that influence the degree of that stream of cash flow into the future, and what your strategy needs to be. So I don't know if you got any thoughts around that just philosophically, Spencer, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, just to second exactly what you said, Perrin, as far as thinking 3 to 5 years in advance, that is the name of the game inside of everything that we try to do at Dentist Advisors. And hopefully it rings true with the dentists that we are advising and those that are looking for, preparing for the future. It's just too difficult to make a decision today on what you're going to do tomorrow. The reality is the preparation of it is what makes it work and effective. And so completely agree with you on the prep work. And frankly, Perrin, the question is asked all the time here inside of our practice, which is, when should I start thinking about either growing another practice or an exit? So
at least they're approaching it from a standpoint of thinking about it.
yeah.
So sometimes people backslide into bad decisions in haste, and rarely do those ever work out well, and we'll talk about, transitions, transactions, selling a business, and all that at your summit this June. And I'm really looking forward to that. And I think what the audience will hear is that it's a process, not an event. And it's a process that probably needs to start a year to 2 years before you think you're ready to start the process. And we'll unpack a lot of that. I mean, that's assuming if you want to maximize the value of the business upon exit. Look, if somebody has a health scare or something calamitous happen and it, kind of forces a process, and that's something a little bit different. Obviously, we'll juggle all those details, if you will, in June when we're together. But maybe for today in this session, I'm going to give you two things that we see that are critical decision points if you are going to build a group practice. And the first one here is most people who elect to go down the road are usually going to acquire additional locations in lieu of building additional locations. We are really big fans of de novos, meaning the ground up build out, your systems, your processes, marketing plan, starting with patient number one, because you can perpetuate your culture, your systems, processes, and to a degree, you have a greater aspect of control around it. That being said, de novos make a lot of people nervous because they're not sure if the patients are ever going to come or show up, and I get it. So most people will elect to build a group practice by acquiring another practice from a seller. So whenever you buy a business, a healthcare practice, dentistry, or otherwise, you never buy that business to maintain it. You should always identify two or three areas of potential revenue generation in the business and two or three areas of cost reduction in the business. And that improvement over usually a 12 to 24 month period means that you're increasing the value of the business and you're increasing the cash flows of the business to offset whatever the debt service is that you're required to pay back the bank. And everybody, all of our clients are pre-private equity, so they're all using bank funds to grow. And bank funding is the right vehicle or tool in the emerging group practice space. So the big mistake here is that people end up overpaying for practices because they don't understand the difference between valuation methodologies. I don't want to get too wonky on this, but a traditional dental practice broker is probably going to represent a typical practice as a percentage of collections in terms of what you will pay. And that's different from a multiple of EBITDA or let alone free cash flow. And this is where people get into trouble. They also get into trouble because they fail to generate those improvements in revenue or profitability that I referenced earlier. And if you are simply if you're borrowing money to buy a practice and think that you're going to cash flow wonderfully just by maintaining it, then stop right where you are. You can shut down this webinar and never acquire a practice at any point in the future, and you'll be better off.
Right.
Okay. So here's the symptom that we hear from clients all too often when they come to work with us in a consulting relationship. And that is, hey, Perrin, why is it that I'm making less income now when I own 4 practices versus what I made when I only owned 1? Like, how is that possible? The business is a lot larger and I'm taking home less, and it's got me in trouble with my spouse at home. What's up with that? Well, I'm going to unpack some numbers for you really quickly and show you what that looks like. So here's a business you might own. Typical general dentistry practice, maybe not typical, but a general dentistry practice example of $1 million in revenue. It's split 80-20 clinical to hygiene. It's running a 60% overhead rate. And from a pre-tax, pre-debt service owner income, operating income level, about 400 grand. You pay some amount in taxes using a blended rate of 25% because it's a round number. So, and let's say you don't have any debt on this practice. So you're taking home about $300,000. All right. That's the business that you own. When we cast that as from an EBITDA perspective, EBITDA being normalized cash flow, normalized after owner clinical compensation. That business looks like $1 million in revenue, split 80-20 clinical to hygiene. We're going to use a 30% clinical compensation rate as if we had to hire an associate and replace ourselves. We might pay him or her 30% of their collections to do the work that we're no longer doing. So you'd have a $240,000 attributed to clinical compensation, which leaves entrepreneurial profit left over after all overhead and compensation of about 160 grand. Same pre-tax owner income of 400,000, no debt on it, 300 grand free cash flow. Pretty simple. So let's go out and buy a business real quick. And when we buy this first practice, it's going to be a practice that looks exactly like the one that you and I own right now, or that I own right now. It generates $1 million in revenue. When a practice broker values it, he or she might value it between 60 to 80% of collections, meaning about $800,000, 80% of $1 million here. It is also split 80-20, clinical to hygiene. It's also running a 60% overhead rate. And when we employ an associate to work in that practice, we're going to pay him or her 30% of their collections. So this is a business that generates about $160,000 of entrepreneurial profit, which is a close enough approximation of EBITDA. And the business that values at 800 grand also represents a 5 times EBITDA multiple. All right. So EBITDA multiple and percentage of valuation are not the same thing. At a base level, you really owe it to yourself to understand the differences and how to calculate both of them. Now, if we borrow money from a bank, I built this deck back when lending rates were reasonable or lower. So I'm using here debt service to the tune of about 4%. And it costs us about $97,000 each year to borrow money from the bank and pay for the $800,000 practice we just bought. So we pay some taxes on the entrepreneurial profit of 160 grand. We pay the bank 97 grand. And we put $23,000 in our checking account or our investment account or something. All right. You know, pretty straightforward. All right. And cash flow positive. Well, you know, we pretty confident that went well. So what do we want to do next? Well, we want to go out and buy another one. And here's where we start to frankly lose a little bit of ground. And when I say lose a little bit of ground, what I mean is that if you're going to build a multi-location group, that's really hard to do from behind the chair. So the first thing that's going to happen is for me to go out and find additional practices to buy and meet with the sellers and all that kind of jazz. I got to start paying an associate to pick up a couple of clinical days for me. In this case, if I work 4 days a week, I'm going to pay an associate to take on 2 of them. I'll still work clinically the other 2, and I'll be the CEO business development guy the balance of the week. So here we start paying an associate to do half the work that we're no longer doing, which lowers our personal income because we're paying somebody else. And you can see that even after we pay taxes, it's a pretty dramatic decrease in our take-home income. That's the first thing. So are we prepared for that clinical transition away from the chair? 9 times out of 10, the entrepreneurial dentist is not. So this is the first point they start losing money. Hey, where did my personal income go? Well, it paid the rate for the associate to do the work you don't want to do. Now, we just bought $1 million practice and it went fairly well. So let's go buy another one. Again, $1 million general dentistry practice, but maybe this one is a little bit more of a competitive acquisition. It might cost us 90% of revenue, not 80%. So we got to borrow 900 grand from the bank to do it. And maybe this is a business that's also got a veteran team, or it's got just higher costs or more higher rent or something, but it's running an overall higher overhead rate of about 65%, which is not unusual. But with a higher overhead rate and a higher valuation, you can probably see where which direction we're heading in. This is a business that generates lower entrepreneurial profit. And when we borrow money from a bank, we're borrowing more dollars to do it. And this is the first instance where we start to go cash flow negative.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the money that we've borrowed and the overhead of that business is not generating enough cash flow to offset the debt service payment and the taxes and be net positive in our checking account or our investment account. So what do we do to fix that? Well, you probably you probably know where this story is going, right? So, well, if we think that this one didn't work out quite as well as planned, we're going to go buy a 4th one. So here's the 4th location, but we're not going to try to find another $1 million practice. We're going to ratchet things down a little bit. We might acquire an ADA average practice, $750,000 in revenue, And this is a business that would value at a lower level, lower dollar amount, right? So the prior one cost us 900 grand. We're going to pay half that, $450,000, to buy a business that generates $750,000 in revenue. But you and I both know about fixed costs and variable costs, right? And a business that generates lower revenue doesn't typically clear its fixed costs to the degree that one that generates higher revenue, at least not in the world of dentistry. So here it's not unusual to see a lower revenue business with a higher overhead rate. And if it has higher overhead, it means it's generating less operational cash flow. And we're still borrowing money from a bank, even though it's a lesser loan, total loan amount. We are still going further in the hole in terms of after tax, after debt. And this is a simplified example. There are a lot of, see your accountant about all this, right? But I'm trying to just boil things down to show you how things go a little bit from bad to worse. So net, what happened here? We started out with one pretty successful practice, probably easy to manage, funding a nice lifestyle for us, and not too much chaos. Honestly, we acquired 3 additional locations, so now the business is 4 times as large in terms of footprint. It's also about 4 times as large in terms of revenue. Yet when all is said and done, after paying the bank their fair share of what the loans cost us, we're taking home about a third less in income. And this is a typical scenario that we see when people start building emerging groups and they're not prepared for it, and they're not good enough at operations to really grow revenues, curtail costs, and understand what the valuation structure is, what they're paying for, and what the bank's going to be owed. And this is where we say that income and wealth are competing interest when you're building a group practice. The worst thing for your clients that are watching this right now is to be mid-career, successful, bored, and start making bad decisions without all the facts. Because now the obligations to the bank take over the prudence of where their cash was going in terms of working with dentist advisors and planning for a rainy day in the future. The urgency and the necessity of their daily obligations around debt service completely mask what should be a retirement, a financial planning mindset, and that puts you all at loggerheads with them due to some of their bad decisions. So I'll take a quick pause there and see how all that landed with you.
Inside our group, we have this term of when you're mid-career, you're successful, and you start to get bored, suddenly a random act of finance comes about, and that random act of finance could be associated with purchasing another practice or two, and or other things, and I think it boils down to, Perrin, like, this is when you need the consultant to say, sit down, take a deep breath for a second, and let's just kind of look at the model. Like, as I sit here and watch page by page on your presentation, it's just what you need to do to, like, have a little bit of a reality check.
Yep. Again, I'm not here to talk you into doing it. I'm not necessarily here to talk you out of doing it, but we need to have realistic expectations along the way for sure.
Yes.
Good stuff. Let me, I know I don't want to run the clock out on us, but let me hit one more thing quickly, because I think this is a key decision point. If you do decide to start adding additional locations, regardless of how fast or how many you want to add, through default, you are building an associate-driven business now. And the turnover of associates is bad for cash flow. It's bad for continuity of patient care, and it creates a ton of stress and chaos on the founder of the business. And this is really the biggest challenge for any group practice, to get a handle on or solve. It doesn't matter if you're 1,500 locations or going from 1 to 2. So if you can solve it, you'll probably build a pretty healthy business and a healthy culture. And if you can't, you're going to be living life as a hamster on a wheel. So let me share just a couple of facts from the ADA and the ADEA real quick about sort of what the next, I don't know, 5 to 10 years looks like in terms of the entering workforce. And the first is that, the Health Policy Institute at the ADA is projecting through all the recent, we've added a lot of dental schools recently, and they're packed to the gills. It's a very competitive profession to enter into. Guys like you and I wouldn't pass the boards or be able to get anywhere close to getting into it, thankfully, right? So the ADA is projecting that the number of dentists per capita, meaning per 100,000, is going to increase about 10% from about 61 roughly today to about 67 in 2040. So there are going to be a lot more dentists in the world. And when the American Dental Education Association surveyed some of the more recent classes to ask if how many of them would be willing to work with a group or DSO upon graduation, this last year, 30% responded affirmatively that they would be, and that was up from only 12% about 5 years ago. So there are more graduates coming, and more of them are open-minded about working with a group or DSO, which is a significant shift from the prior generations. These kids are coming out of school with a ton of educational debt, an average of almost $305,000, and that is not including any specialty work. That is not or specialty school. That is not including any personal debt. This is educational debt alone. So it goes to or stands to reason that they're probably not itching to graduate from school and take on $1 million loan to buy or build their first practice, right? They want to find a home, they want to find a mentor, they want to start paying down some debt and probably starting a family. And as you would well gather, those who are entering their prime earning years, early to mid 30s, fewer and fewer of them own their own practice outright these days, and that's a trend that has been going on for a while, and it's not course correcting back in the other direction either. So I think the key here, if you do want to build a group, there are a couple of things. One, if you're going to build it through acquisition, there are going to be a lot of, the profession is still a little bit top heavy, as the ADA says, and there are going to be a lot of senior dentists exiting the profession, selling their businesses in the next 2 to 3 years or more. And there's also going to be a wave of younger associates, potential associates coming into the workforce in the not too distant future. So your timing, if you want to build a group, is probably good from those two aspects. Like I say, this is the number one problem that every group has to confront if they're going to build some level of longevity and consistency for cash flow, for patient care and otherwise. And, I think most dentists think of partnership and associates in one way only. Historically, the industry has been, I'm a senior dentist, you're my young associate, Spencer. I want you to be a partner. I'm going to sell you 50% of the business today. You're going to borrow money from a bank payable to me. We're equal partners. Then you're going to buy me out for the other 50% in another 5 or 10 years when I want to ride off in the sunset, and this baby's yours at that point, right? So that's the way partnerships have been constructed, basically, since the dawn of time in dentistry. That's not necessarily the right way to think about it from a group practice context. And you can certainly have buy-ins, and they may be the right tool in the toolbox, but in a growing group practice, that it improves in value over time because you're adding locations, you're increasing cash flows and EBITDA, and the businesses value more highly, you can create something called an earn-in model. And I didn't say it at the opening, but I worked 15 years for Patterson Dental Supply in my prior life, and I ran 3 different businesses for them. And I was a general manager in that company. And as a management leadership position, Patterson's a publicly traded NASDAQ company, obviously, but we had something called restricted stock units and stock options, very commonplace in corporate America, but it ties the leadership and the high performing employees to the increase in value of that public company. And if you ever hear somebody say, like, I got a couple of neighbors who work for a couple of the banks in Charlotte, and they've been there for a while and they hate it, because banking is just a challenge, especially at a senior leadership level. And whenever I ask them, well, if you hate it that much, why don't you leave? And they say, well, if I leave, I'm walking away from $400,000 in company stock that I forfeit if I leave before it vests.
Mhm.
So they call it the golden handcuffs. If we've ever heard the phrase golden handcuffs, it means that somebody earned shares in a business, earned equity, earned stock in a business, but they've got to stay for some period of time before it becomes theirs. And it becomes theirs gradually over time. So this is the retention mechanism around golden handcuffs. Everything I just described for an enterprise level bank or dental distribution company or anything else, be it publicly traded or not, is completely applicable in a group dental practice of increasing value. And this is a different mindset for founders of groups. And what we ask people is, hey, would you rather be a 100% owner of a business valued at $2 million or an 80% owner of a business valued at $10 million? Are you interested in the percentage ownership or the dollars wealth that you've created? I think we would all, I hope that you guys would say the wealth and the dollars, right? So this is something that is a different type of a model than what probably most of your audience has ever seen. There's several different earned equity methodologies. This one that I've got in front of you is taken from a prior client in a restricted stock unit scenario. But basically, the nuts and bolts of it are that this founder started out as a 100% owner of probably like a 4 location group, if I remember correctly, maybe 5 location group that was valued at about $9 million. And he added his expectation was to add 1 location per year, and for the lead associate in all of his locations to earn equity, earn shares in the business through his or her collection levels, personal collection levels. And at the end of a 10-year run, the business would have a larger footprint, and he would have associates becoming partners with vesting schedules and golden handcuffs and all that kind of cool stuff. But he would go from 100% owner of the business valued at $9 million to about 75% owner of the business now valued at $36 million. And that's a great outcome in a growing business, the rising tide that lifts all boats, if you can create the right associates to come work for you, create that opportunity, get them to be productive, do more dentistry, more valuable work, get them to stay for the long haul and minimize turnover, and obviously run a more profitable, more highly valued business along the way. Now, that's not easy. That's easier said than done. It's not a given by any stretch, but in these scenarios, for that young associate that joins the team and is carrying $305,000 in student loan debt, and they don't even want to go to the bank and borrow another 100 grand to do anything, this is a way for them to become a partner,
Yep.
a minority partner in the business. And you and I both know that people who are owners operate differently from a mindset standpoint versus those who are just employees. And this is the type of scenario that in a group practice, it's a tool in the toolbox to help you solve the associate turnover type of a scenario. So obviously there's a lot of options and opportunities, and as you think about building a group, there are a lot of other things you need to consider, but solving the acquisition model and what to pay, free cash flow, debt service, and all those considerations, and then minimizing the opportunity for associate turnover. If you can do both of those, you're probably on the road to success. So I'll just spin through this real fast and put my contact information up there, and you can leave it in the show notes and all that too if you'd like. But don't know how any of that landed for you, but hopefully all right.
Man, so good, Perrin. It just, from start to finish, there is so much information that can be taken from the presentation, Perrin, and so much to gain from just sitting and talking with you as a dentist. At Dentist Advisors, we encourage to take the time to plan, like we said before, and look at your next 5-6 years and be proactive about it. No different than having a financial advisor, having someone like Perrin in your corner talking through some of these decisions so that there's not a random act of finance that goes south midway through your successful career. There's a lot more to come with Perrin. As he mentioned, we'll have Perrin at our money summit in June. Excited to have everybody there and Perrin on stage presenting there. Perrin, what a great presentation. This is going to be used a lot throughout all of our social media and content.
That's great. I mean, I hope your audience gets a lot out of it. And we do a lot with numbers, and sometimes numbers make people's heads spin. So being able to go back and watch it a little bit is probably helpful. And obviously, I threw my contact information up there, and y'all have it on our microsite and everything like that. So people, if they want to reach out to me, I take probably 5 to 10 prospective client calls a week where we just spend time talking through somebody's scenario and trying to give a little bit of guidance. And then I can tell them all about our services and everything we do on a one-off. I will tell you also, if people like this type of wonky business education, we have a podcast called Group Practice Accelerator. We drop an episode weekly that typically is more business education type stuff like this, and the people who like that tend to consume it pretty voraciously. So I host probably 95% of them. And if you're having trouble falling asleep at night, my voice is pretty soporific, so you just put that on and you'll be out like a light. So
Perrin, hey, thank you so much for your time. More to come from Perrin, and we'll be in close touch.
Great being with you, Spencer. Thanks.
Perrin.